Ramesh sat alone by the window of his small, quiet house, the kind of home that once echoed with laughter, but now only carried the ticking of an old wall clock. It was early morning, and a gentle ray of sunlight fell on a framed photograph, a picture of him and his son, Arjun, taken years ago, when life still felt like a celebration. Today was Ramesh's 65th birthday. For months he had secretly looked forward to this day, hoping his son would remember. Arjun lived in the city now, busy, ambitious, and far removed from the slow rhythm of his father's life. But Ramesh still believed that no matter how busy life became, a son would never forget the man who raised him. He had even ironed his best kurta the night before, made his favorite tea, and prepared Arjun's favorite halwa, hoping that maybe his son would visit or at least call. Every time his phone buzzed, his heart leapt, but it was always someone else. A bank message. A promotional call. It silenced, then the empty ringtone echoing in his heart. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, and Ramesh watched people passing outside. Neighbors greeting each other, children running to school. Laughter carried by the wind. Everything reminded him of the days when Arjun was small. He remembered his son's little hands tugging at his sleeve, asking Papa, "When will I be big like you?" Back then, Ramesh would smile proudly and reply, "Soon, beta, but promise me you'll never stop being my little boy." Time, however, had its own way of stealing those promises. Arjun grew up, found work in another city, married and drifted into a life too fast for old traditions. Ramesh never complained. He always said, "I'll let him live, he deserves it." But deep down, every father silently hopes his son will remember him, not for duty, but for love. Chidasis. By afternoon, Ramesh's tea had gone cold. He turned on the television, pretending to watch, but his eyes kept glancing toward the phone. The date on the calendar stared back at him, bold and mocking, July 14th, his birthday. He sighed, whispering to himself, and maybe he's busy. Maybe he'll call tonight. His voice cracked when he said it. The house seemed to sigh with him, the ceiling fan humming softly, the old wooden chair creaking under his weight. He thought about how birthdays used to be when his wife, Meena, was alive. She would light a small diya, cook his favorite meal, and together they'd wait for Arjun to come home from school with handmade cards and clumsy gifts. Meena had passed away 5 years ago, and since then, every birthday had grown quieter, lonelier, yet Ramesh held on to faith that his son's love would fill the silence again someday. In the city, Arjun sat in a high-rise office, surrounded by ringing phones, flashing screens, and the endless noise of deadlines. He was in a meeting when his phone buzzed. A reminder popped up, a dad's birthday. He looked at it, frowned, and swiped it away. "You'll call him tonight," he muttered, diving back into work. But the day consumed him, meetings, clients, dinner with colleagues, all the things he once thought defined success. He didn't realize that the man who once stayed awake all night for his fever was now sitting alone, watching the sunset, waiting for a simple call. As evening fell, Ramesh lit a small candle and placed it beside Meena's photo. "You'd scold him if you were here," he said softly, his voice trembling. "You'd remind him what this day means." He sat by the window again, the world outside glowing under streetlights, the silence inside thick and heavy. When the clock struck 9, he smiled faintly. "He must be busy. I'll sleep now. Maybe he'll call tomorrow. And he'll call." He turned off the light, but his eyes remained open in the dark. He didn't want gifts. He didn't want money. All he wanted was to hear his son say, "Happy birthday, Papa." In his apartment miles away, Arjun finally reached home around midnight. He saw the reminder again and sighed. And sighed. "I'll call him first thing in the morning," he said, guilt flickering across his face. But deep down, he knew his father would have waited all day. Still, he convinced himself. He understands. He lay down and drifted off, unaware that sometimes understanding hurts more than anger. The next morning, Ramesh woke up early as usual. He made tea for one and smiled weakly at the rising sun. The hurt was there, quiet but deep. For the first time in years, he whispered to himself, "Maybe it's time I stop expecting." And yet, as he sipped his tea, he couldn't help but glance once more at his silent phone, the symbol of love that had forgotten to ring. The morning after his forgotten birthday, Ramesh sat on the porch, the air still cool and heavy with dew, a quiet ache lingering in his heart like an old song that refused to fade. He tried to convince himself that he was fine, that birthdays were just another day, but the truth was harder to swallow. He had always believed that love needed no reminders, that a son's heart would remember, even when the world distracted him. Still, he poured his tea, fed the sparrows that visited every morning, and whispered, "Oh, maybe he'll call today, even if it's late." Hours passed slowly, like the ticking of the old clock that had seen better years, its hands moving forward even when Ramesh's heart stayed still. Across the city, Arjun woke up late, his head pounding from last night's dinner party. He saw the missed reminder on his phone again, a dad's birthday yesterday. He frowned, cursing under his breath. Damn, I forgot. He stared at the message for a long moment, feeling a sharp stab of guilt, then brushed it away. He'll understand, he told himself again, not realizing how many times he had repeated that excuse over the years. He made himself a cup of coffee, opened his laptop, and drowned his guilt beneath the hum of the city's chaos. Back in the small town, Ramesh decided to step out to the market, maybe just to feel the world moving, to distract himself from the silence that had become too heavy to bear. He walked slowly, his stick tapping the ground rhythmically, nodding at familiar faces who greeted him with polite smiles. Enamist, Ramesh Bhai, the shopkeeper called. "How are you today?" Ramesh smiled faintly. "I'm fine, Beta. Just thought I'd buy some vegetables." He didn't mention that it had been his birthday. Somehow saying it aloud felt like admitting he'd been forgotten. As he returned home, carrying a small bag of groceries, he stopped by the old temple near his lane. He lit an incense stick and closed his eyes, praying not for health or wealth, but for his son's happiness. Because that's what fathers do. They forgive in silence, even when the heart cracks a little more each day. By afternoon, Arjun's wife, Nisha, noticed her husband staring at his phone during lunch. "What's wrong?" she asked, hesitated, then said softly, "I forgot Dad's birthday yesterday." "Yesterday," Nisha sighed. "You should call him now. He must have waited." Arjun nodded, but his face tightened with hesitation. "It's already late. It'll be awkward." Nisha frowned. "Awkward? He's your father." Arjun avoided her eyes. "I'll call him tonight. When I get home." He said it like a promise, but inside, something told him he might not. Work always came first, excuses came easier, and love always waited in silence. Evening descended again in Ramesh's house, painting the walls with fading light. He made another cup of tea, his hands trembling slightly. He looked at his phone, smiled faintly, and said aloud, "These new phones, maybe they stop working after a while." It was a gentle lie he told himself to soften the truth. He scrolled through old photos. Arjun as a child with birthday balloons. Arjun holding Mena's hand. Arjun smiling proudly in his graduation gown. His eyes glistened as he whispered, "You've become everything we dreamed of, my boy. Just don't forget who dreamed it for you. At 9 that night, Arjun finally left work, exhaustion pulling at his shoulders. He pulled out his phone in the elevator and hovered over his father's contact. For a long moment, his thumb rested on the e-call button. But then another call came in, his boss reminding him of a morning presentation. "Yes, sir, I'll send it tonight," Arjun said, stepping out of the elevator. By the time he reached home, he was too tired, too distracted, too disconnected. He thought of calling, but the thought dissolved like smoke. He tossed his phone aside, telling himself, tomorrow. Definitely tomorrow." That night, as rain began to fall softly outside, Ramesh sat by the window again. He watched the droplets race down the glass, the world outside blurred and shimmering. The power went out, plunging the house into a familiar darkness. He lit a candle, the flame flickering weakly, just like his hope. Maybe he tried calling, and the signal failed. He murmured, smiling at the thought, "Yes, that must be it." He closed his eyes, listening to the rain whisper against the roof. In the silence that followed, the phone finally rang, but it was just a telemarketer offering a credit card. He hung up gently, whispered a goodnight, Meena, and looked at her photo one more time before the candle burned down to a small dying glow. Far away, Arjun lay awake, a strange heaviness pressing on his chest. He couldn't explain it, but for the first time in years, he missed home, the smell of tea, the sound of his father's laughter, the comfort of that old house. Guilt crept in quietly, reminding him that love, once taken for granted, doesn't always wait forever. Days turned into weeks, and though the rain had stopped, its dampness still lingered in the corners of Ramesh's small house, much like the quiet ache that had taken root in his heart, an ache that refused to leave, no matter how busy he tried to keep himself. Every morning he swept the porch, watered his plants, and fed the sparrows, pretending life hadn't changed. Yet even the birds seemed to sense the emptiness in his voice, for they came less often now, as if silence had made its home here, too. The phone remained still on the table beside the newspaper, collecting dust instead of memories. And though Ramesh told himself that maybe Arjun was simply busy, that his son's life must be full of meetings, deadlines, and responsibilities, the truth gnawed quietly beneath those excuses. He missed hearing his boy's voice, the warmth in the word Papa that had once filled his evenings with purpose. One afternoon, while rummaging through an old drawer for some bills, he found a bundle of letters tied together with a red string. They were from Arjun's school days, scribbled notes full of childish handwriting, spelling mistakes, and love that overflowed without restraint. Papa, I won the race. One said. Papa, you're my hero. Another. He smiled sadly, tracing the uneven letters with his trembling fingers. Somewhere between those letters and the smartphone that now lay silent, something precious had been lost, the habit of saying things that mattered. A few days later, while at the post office to collect his pension, Ramesh noticed the clerk handing out greeting cards for the upcoming festival season. Bright, colorful, full of joy. He picked one up, turning it over, feeling the texture of its paper, the kind that once carried love across miles. He thought of writing to Arjun. A letter, just like the old days. Not an email, not a message, but a letter in his own handwriting. Something real, something that couldn't be ignored with a swipe. That evening he sat at his table under the yellow glow of the lamp, pen in hand, and began, Dear Arjun, how are you, Bada? The words flowed slowly at first, hesitant, like a conversation with someone who might not listen. He wrote about his health, about the garden, about the neighbor's new puppy, about how he missed Mina's cooking, and how the nights had grown quieter without her laughter. But when it came to the part about his birthday, his hand trembled. I thought you might call that day, he wrote. But maybe you were busy. It's all right, I understand. The ink smudged as he paused, staring at the paper, wondering if it sounded too desperate, too small. He folded the letter carefully, slipped it into an envelope, and placed it beside his wallet. He would mail it tomorrow. But tomorrow came and went, as tomorrows often do, and the letter stayed there on the table, waiting for courage to accompany it to the post box. In the city, Arjun's days blurred together. Promotion season had arrived, and with it came the endless grind, late nights, client dinners, back-to-back presentations. He barely saw Nisha anymore, barely slept, barely remembered what peace felt like. One evening, while cleaning his desk, she found a sticky note with the words Call Papa scrawled on it. She sighed, held it out to him, and said, You keep writing it but never doing it. Arjun looked up briefly, his eyes tired. He knows I love him, he muttered, and returned to his screen. And does he? Nisha asked softly, but her words bounced off the walls unheard. That night, while scrolling through social media, he saw a video of an old man celebrating his birthday surrounded by family. The old man's smile, pure, unguarded, stabbed at something deep within Arjun. For the first time in weeks, he thought of calling, but the hour was late again. Tomorrow, he whispered. Just like before, tomorrow, the word that fools both the guilty and the forgotten. Back home, Ramesh finally decided to post the letter. He put on his sweater, slipped the envelope into his pocket, and walked down the narrow lane toward the post office. On the way, he stopped at the bakery and bought 2 cream rolls, Arjun's favorite as a child. He smiled as he walked, imagining his son's surprise when he'd open the letter, maybe even call immediately after reading it. But as he reached the post office, a small group of children ran past, laughing, splashing puddles from the leftover rain. One of them brushed against him, and the envelope slipped from his hand, landing in a shallow puddle. Ramesh quickly bent to pick it up, but the paper had already begun to blur, the ink bleeding like tears on the page. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the ruined letter, then quietly tore it in half. Maybe it's for the best, he murmured. He's busy after all. He dropped the pieces into a nearby bin, then turned back toward home, the cream rolls growing cold in his hand. That evening, Nisha convinced Arjun to take a break. Just one day, she said. Go see your father. You'll feel better. He nodded absent-mindedly but didn't commit. Still, something in her tone stayed with him. Late that night, unable to sleep, he found himself scrolling through old photos on his phone, pictures of his wedding, of his parents, of his childhood. One photo stopped him, his father holding him in front of a small cake, both smiling, eyes full of love. The guilt that had been quietly nesting in his heart spread its wings. "I'll visit this weekend," he promised himself. "Oh, for sure. But weekends too have a way of filling up." Back in the old house, Ramesh sat by the window, the half-lit room breathing memories. Red room breathing memories. He placed the now empty cream roll plate beside him and whispered to the photo of Meena. "He'll come soon, you'll see. Our boy hasn't forgotten completely." He smiled, though his eyes told a different story. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the trees, and a few torn pieces of paper drifted past the porch, remnants of a letter that never came. And somewhere in that dance of wind and regret, time folded quietly upon itself, carrying a father's love into another sleepless night. The weekend arrived wrapped in the soft hum of the city, where Arjun sat at his office desk, even though it was Saturday, staring blankly at his computer screen as rain streaked down the window beside him, each drop echoing the thought he had been avoiding all week, that promise he had made to himself in the quiet hours of guilt. "I'll visit Papa this weekend." But now, surrounded by the noise of ringing phones and murmured deadlines, that promise felt distant, like a dream from another life. He told himself it was just bad timing, that maybe next week would be better. He even typed a message, Papa, planning to visit soon, but didn't send it. His thumb hovered over the send button for a long time before the familiar tug of responsibility pulled him back into the whirlpool of work. The message stayed unsent, and the moment passed just like all the others before it. Meanwhile, miles away, in a small town where the afternoon sun fell like honey on the old tiled roofs, Ramesh was preparing for the visit that he somehow knew was coming. He had cleaned every corner of the house, washed the curtains, and even taken out the old photo albums. He bought fresh fruits, polished the brass plates Meena had once loved, and made a list of Arjun's favorite dishes. "He'll be happy to see how well I'm keeping the house," he told the neighbor with a proud smile that barely hid the longing beneath it. The neighbor, kind but cautious, didn't have the heart to say what everyone else in the lane already whispered, that Arjun hadn't visited in over a year. That evening, Ramesh stood by the gate, watching the road as dusk began to fall. Every passing car made his heart jump. He checked the time again and again, adjusting the collar of his sweater, smoothing his hair, practicing the smile he'd wear, when Arjun finally arrived. The kettle whistled inside, but he ignored it, afraid that if he went in for even a second, he might miss the moment. Across the street, little Rohan from the neighbor's house came out with his ball and asked, "Uncle, who are you waiting for?" Ramesh chuckled softly. My son, Beta. He's coming today, eh? Huh. For tip." Rohan grinned. "Will he bring me chocolate?" Ramesh laughed. "Of course I'll tell him to." But as night fell and the streetlights flickered to life, that laughter began to fade. The cars became fewer, the road quieter. The kettle inside had gone cold. Still, Ramesh stood there stubbornly, the way only fathers can stand, against logic, against time, against disappointment. Finally, when the sky turned black and even the crickets fell silent, he went inside, closing the gate behind him with a heavy sigh. At that same moment, in a dimly lit restaurant across the city, Arjun sat with his colleagues, his phone buzzing faintly in his pocket. He didn't check it. He was laughing at a joke, sipping his drink, trying to drown that persistent whisper in his mind that said, "You were supposed to be somewhere else today." Nisha had reminded him in the morning, her tone firm yet soft. "You'll be waiting, Arjun. Don't do this again. Don't do this again." He had nodded absently while knotting his tie, but deep down he knew she was right. Even now, as laughter surrounded him, he couldn't shake the image of his father standing by the gate. Waiting. It flickered in his mind like an unfinished sentence, like a memory that refuses to fade. After dinner, as he finally checked his phone, there were no missed calls, no messages. He sighed with relief, then guilt. He didn't call, he thought. Maybe he's not expecting me. The irony was cruel, both waiting, both silent, both thinking the other had moved on. Back in the small town, Ramesh ate dinner alone. The curry had gone cold, but he didn't mind. He placed an extra plate on the table anyway, out of habit, or perhaps hope. "In case he arrives late," he whispered. After eating a few bites, he poured another cup of tea and sat by the window, listening to the crickets. The house was filled with the faint scent of cardamom and loneliness. He thought of calling Arjun again, but pride stopped him. "He's busy," he said aloud, as if convincing the walls. Well, I don't want to disturb him. The phone glowed faintly in the dim room, like a stubborn ember refusing to die out. He watched it for a long time, then finally turned it face down again. The next morning, he woke early, though sleep had barely touched him. The street outside was wet from the night's drizzle, the earth smelling of renewal. He swept the porch again, fed the sparrows, and looked down the road once more. Nothing. The emptiness of the lane mirrored the emptiness inside him. Around noon, the postman arrived with a few letters and a smile. And looked nothing for you today, Ramesh Bhai, he said kindly, knowing too well that the old man always asked. Ramesh nodded, pretending not to care. That's all right, he replied softly. It may be tomorrow, but as he turned to go inside, he felt a sharp twinge in his chest. Ramesh nodded. It passed quickly, but it left him breathless. He sat on the step for a while, letting the wind cool his face. I'm fine, he muttered, pressing a hand to his heart. Just tired. That evening, when the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of gold and sorrow, Ramesh finally gave up waiting at the gate. Inside, placed Arjun's old photo back on the table, and whispered, maybe next week. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides more than it shows, and sat down to write another letter, shorter this time, simpler. Just wanted to tell you I'm proud of you, Beta. Always have been. Don't work too hard. He didn't post this one either. And he folded it neatly and kept it in the drawer beside his bed, right next to the first letter he never sent. Then he lay down, the hum of the ceiling fan filling the silence, and closed his eyes. Far away in the city, Arjun sat in traffic, staring at the red brake lights ahead. Fudens, sit. He thought of calling, again, but the thought arrived too late, smothered by exhaustion. He reached home, placed his phone on the table, and said to Nisha, I'll visit next Sunday. She nodded, though her eyes said she'd heard it before. As he fell asleep, the sound of distant thunder rolled in, and for a brief moment he dreamt of home, the smell of wet earth, his father's laughter, his mother's voice calling from the kitchen. He smiled in his sleep, unaware that some dreams carry warnings disguised as memories. And in that small quiet house, under the whispering fan and the watchful eyes of old photographs, Ramesh slept too, peaceful, hopeful, still waiting for the knock that would not come that night. The days began to blend together, one into the other, like pages of an old diary smudged by time, and though Ramesh still woke up early each morning, made his tea, and went through the motions of routine, something in his rhythm had changed. Slower now, quieter, as if every action was weighed down by a memory he could no longer carry with ease. The little house that once echoed with laughter and conversation had grown too large for one man's silence. Yet he filled it the best he could with the hum of the radio, the clinking of cups, and the gentle murmur of beat it. His own thoughts. One morning, while dusting the bookshelf, he came across a small stack of old envelopes tucked between two novels. He smiled faintly. They were letters from Meena, his late wife, written decades ago when Arjun was still in school. Her words were simple, full of tenderness, always reminding him to eat on time or to take rest when tired. Ramesh sat there for a long time, the paper trembling slightly in his hands as he whispered, You were the heart of this home, Meena. Without you, it beats too slow. He looked toward Arjun's photograph, still framed on the wall beside hers, and felt that same tug, that same helpless love that stretches across distance and years, but never breaks completely. That afternoon, when he went to his drawer to keep the letters back, he noticed something else. The second unsent letter he had written to Arjun, the one that simply said, I'm proud of you, Beta. He picked it up, turned it over, and smiled with a kind of weary fondness. Maybe it's time this one finds him, he murmured. So he put it in an envelope, sealed it carefully, and decided to mail it the next day. But fate, as always, had other plans. The following morning was unusually hot for the season, the kind of heat that makes the air heavy and the heart restless. So Ramesh dressed neatly, combed his thin gray hair, and set out toward the post office with his walking stick in one hand and the letter tucked safely in his shirt pocket. He walked slowly, stopping every few steps to catch his breath, but his face carried a calm determination. Today he would finally send his words where they belonged. Along the way, he met his neighbor's daughter, who greeted him with a cheerful, Good morning, Uncle Jesus. Ramesh smiled and said, Good morning, Beta. I'm going to post a letter to my son today. The girl's eyes lit up. That's nice. Will he come visit you soon? Ramesh's smile faltered for a second before he said softly, Maybe. I think he will. He continued walking, each step a small act of faith. A small act of faith. When he finally reached the post office, he stood in line patiently, clutching the envelope like something sacred. But just as his turn came, he realized he had forgotten his reading glasses at home and couldn't see the address line properly. My memory, he chuckled to the clerk. It plays tricks on me. The clerk offered to help fill it out, and Ramesh dictated slowly. A Mr. Arjun Ramesh Sharma, Greenfield Apartments, Tower B. Then, suddenly unsure if the flat number was still the same, he hesitated. He moved recently, he murmured. Maybe I should confirm first. The clerk smiled politely, and Ramesh, embarrassed, took the letter back. I'll come tomorrow, he said, after confirming. He slipped it back into his pocket and walked home, the heat rising from the road shimmering around his feet like a mirage. At home, he placed the letter beside the photo frame on his desk, intending to call Arjun that evening to confirm the address. But when the evening came, he found himself staring at the phone again, unable to press the buttons. He's probably busy, he said to himself, as he always did. Instead, he turned on the television for background noise and fell asleep in his chair, the letter resting beside his hand. It was still there the next morning when the sunlight streamed through the window, turning the white paper a soft shade of gold. Days passed and the letter gathered a fine layer of dust, quietly waiting like its writer had always done. Meanwhile, in the city, Arjun's life continued in its relentless pace. His promotion finally came through, the result of years of sacrifice, sleepless nights, and missed calls. The office threw him a small celebration. There were claps, speeches, smiles, and for a brief moment, pride flickered in his chest. I should tell Papa, he thought. He'd be so happy. He opened his phone, searched for his father's contact, and stared at it. The screen blurred slightly as a lump rose in his throat. I'll tell him in person, he decided. I'll visit this weekend. He said the same thing to Nisha that night, and she smiled, though her eyes softened with silent relief. Please do, Arjun, she said. He needs to see you. He needs to see you. And you need to see him. He nodded, truly meaning it this time. But the weekend came, and once again, work intervened. A sudden client meeting, an urgent deadline, a delayed flight. Next week, he told himself, for the 100th time. Each excuse seemed reasonable, but together they built a wall of absence. A week later, Nisha's mother called to say she wasn't feeling well, and they drove to another city to visit her. The visit stretched longer than expected. Days turned into another week, and the thought of calling his father slipped further down the list of things he planned to do as soon. And so, the letter on Ramesh's table remained untouched, unsent, and unseen, while the space between father and son grew quietly wider. One evening, as twilight painted the world in shades of amber and regret, Ramesh sat by the window, looking out at the empty lane. He thought of the letter and smiled weakly. Maybe it doesn't matter if I send it, he murmured. He knows what's in my heart. He knows what's in my heart. The fan whirred above him, the light flickered softly, and in that stillness, he closed his eyes, letting his thoughts drift between past and present. Outside, the first stars appeared, small and distant, like the memories of love that refused to die, even when forgotten. The letter stayed on the table that night, quiet, sealed, and waiting. A silent bridge between two hearts that still beat for each other, but no longer met in time. The night had been unusually silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, almost alive, the kind that seems to press against the windows and echo through the corners of a lonely house. And when dawn finally came, it crept softly into Ramesh's home, through the cracks, in the curtains, spilling light across the table where the forgotten letter still lay beside a half-empty cup of tea, cold and untouched. The faint scent of yesterday's rain lingered in the air, as if time itself refused to move on. And in that moment, the old man stirred in his chair, his breathing shallow, his face turned toward the morning sun. The newspaper boy arrived, tossing the day's paper onto the porch with a soft thud. But there was no sound of footsteps coming to retrieve it this time. Hours passed, and when the neighbor, Mrs. Verma, noticed that Ramesh hadn't appeared for his usual morning greeting, she grew uneasy. She called out from the gate once, twice, then again, louder, but silence answered her. Finally, worried, she stepped inside. The door, as always, was unlocked. Ramesh had never seen the need to keep the world out. She found him still in his chair, his eyes closed, the faintest smile on his lips, as if he were lost in a peaceful dream. The letter rested beside his hand, his fingers gently brushing its edge, as though he had meant to send it but never quite found the strength to. Mrs. Verma's heart sank. She whispered his name softly, then again, but the stillness in the room told her what she already knew. Later that day, word spread through the neighborhood. The kind man who always fed the sparrows, who shared sweets during festivals, who never missed a smile, was gone. The local postman, upon hearing the news, walked quietly to the house, removed his cap, and stood for a moment in silence. On the table beside the teacup and spectacles, he noticed the sealed envelope. Gently he picked it up, saw the name written in trembling handwriting, Mr. Arjun Ramesh Sharma, and his eyes softened. He meant for this to go out. The postman murmured, his throat tightening. I'll make sure it reaches. And so, without ceremony, he slipped the letter into his bag, promising silently to deliver it himself. That evening, the small house was filled with people. Neighbors, well-wishers, familiar faces carrying sorrow and sympathy. Yet in the midst of the murmurs and condolences, the photo of Meena and Ramesh on the wall seemed to smile quietly, reunited in a way that words couldn't capture. Kudut. 2 days later in the city, Arjun sat in his office, tired but restless. His phone buzzed, an unknown number flashing on the screen. He hesitated before answering. "Hello?" he said briskly. The voice on the other end was gentle. Hesitant. "Is this Mr. Arjun Sharma?" "Yes," he replied. "Who's speaking?" The caller took a breath. "I'm calling from your father's neighborhood. I'm sorry to tell you, sir. Your father passed away 2 days ago." The words landed like stones, each syllable shattering something inside him. For a moment, Arjun couldn't speak. Fortsuko. The world around him blurred. The hum of the office, the tapping of keyboards, the murmur of voices. All of it faded into a ringing emptiness. "What?" he finally whispered, his throat dry. "That's not possible. I was going to visit him this weekend." But the truth hung there, heavy and unyielding. The caller continued softly, explaining how they found him, how peaceful he looked, how everyone had gathered for the funeral. Arjun sat frozen, staring at nothing, the phone trembling in his hand. "He waited for me," he muttered, his voice breaking. "He waited, and I didn't go. I didn't go." His colleagues looked up, concern etched on their faces, but he couldn't hear them anymore. Guilt washed over him in waves, sharp, suffocating, relentless. That night, Arjun and Nisha drove to his hometown in silence. The road stretched endlessly before them, the headlights cutting through darkness that felt far too thick. When they finally reached, the house was quiet, its windows dark. Mrs. Verma met them at the gate, her eyes red from tears. "He spoke of you often," she said softly. "He was proud, you know. He never complained, not once." Arjun nodded, unable to form words. Inside, the air smelled faintly of incense. On the table, neatly placed beside a small garlanded photo of his father, lay the letter, the one he had never received. Arjun stared at it for a long moment before picking it up, his hands trembling as he broke the seal. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, but every word felt alive. "Just wanted to tell you I'm proud of you, Beta. Always have been. Don't work too hard. That was it. Don't work too hard. That was it." Simple, small, yet enough to undo him completely. Tears spilled freely down his face as he whispered, "I'm sorry, Papa. I should have come sooner." The letter trembled in his hands as he clutched it to his chest, as if holding on to the last piece of a love he had taken for granted. The next morning, Arjun sat on the porch, staring at the sparrows hopping about, waiting for crumbs that would never come again. He placed some grains on the ground anyway. His father's old habit, finding life through him. As the birds pecked at the food, the morning sun rose over the house, warm and golden. Nisha stepped out quietly, placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "He's at peace now." Arjun nodded slowly, his voice barely a whisper. He shouldn't have had to find peace alone. He looked at the letter again, the paper now crinkled from his tears, and thought about all the moments he had traded for meetings, for deadlines, for a life that suddenly felt so hollow. Boo. That night, before leaving, he stood in front of his father's photo and said softly, "I'll make it right somehow, Papa, I promise." And though no sound came from the still frame on the wall, Arjun could almost hear his father's gentle reply, "I know you will, Beta." When he left the next morning, he locked the door gently, slipping the key into his pocket. As he walked away, he glanced back one last time. The sunlight spilled across the veranda, and in its glow, the house looked almost alive, as if it were smiling through the quiet. Not with sadness, but with forgiveness. When Arjun returned to the city, the world around him seemed unchanged, but something within him had shifted forever. The tall glass buildings, the noise of honking cars, the endless rush of people chasing time. All of it felt distant, meaningless, almost cruel in its indifference. Its difference. His father's absence followed him like a shadow, soft yet constant, appearing in the quietest of moments. In the morning, when he reached for his phone and half expected a message that would never come, in the evenings when he walked past a park and saw old men laughing together, their wrinkles folding into joy, and thought of the man who used to wait for him with that same gentle smile. At work, his colleagues greeted him the same way. The world kept spinning, but Arjun could no longer find the rhythm to match its pace. Every file he opened, every meeting he attended, seemed to whisper a single question. Was it worth it? One night, as he sat alone in the dim glow of his apartment, he took out the letter again, smoothing its creases as though trying to bring his father's presence back to life. But don't work too hard. Those 4 words stared back at him, burning through the paper, through his chest, through the walls of the life he'd built around ambition and neglect. He thought of his father's tired hands, of the little house that still smelled of tea and old memories, and suddenly, the apartment that once felt luxurious now felt hollow, like a hotel room meant for strangers passing through. So Nisha watched him quietly from across the room. She could see the weight in his eyes, the guilt that no apology could erase. She walked over, sat beside him, and said softly, "He knew you loved him, Arjun." He never doubted that. Arjun nodded, but the words barely reached him. Frailly reached him. "Then why didn't I show it?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "Why did I wait for later when he needed me then?" Nisha didn't answer. Some questions weren't meant for answers, only understanding. The next weekend, Arjun packed a small bag and told Nisha he needed to go somewhere. She didn't ask where, only pressed his hand and said, "A go." The road back to his father's town felt different this time. He wasn't driving to visit someone. He was returning to something, perhaps to himself. When he reached the old house, it greeted him with silence. Oh, care. Dust floated through the light like tiny ghosts of the past. And as he stepped inside, he could almost hear his father's laughter, the clink of his teacup, the creak of the old wooden chair. On the table, the framed photo of his parents still stood, their smiles unchanged by time. Arjun placed his hand gently over it and whispered, "I'm here now, Papa." He spent the day cleaning the house, dusting the shelves, sweeping the floors, restoring every corner as if tending to his father's memory. When he found his father's old diary tucked inside the drawer, he sat down and opened it. The pages were filled with simple entries, weather notes, grocery lists, a few short poems, and small reflections. But one line, written in faint pencil, caught his breath. "Arjun is busy these days. But I'm proud of him. He's doing well. No trace of bitterness, no disappointment, only love." That night, Arjun lit a candle beside the photo and sat there quietly, letting the flickering light wash over him. "I'll make you proud, Papa," he said softly, "but not with money, not with work, with the kind of son I should have been." In the morning, he visited the small temple his father used to frequent. The priest recognized him instantly and said, "Your father used to talk about you all the time." He always said his son was his greatest blessing. Arjun smiled faintly, blinking back tears. "I wish I'd been there more for him," he admitted. The priest placed a hand on his shoulder. "He knew your heart, son. That's enough." As Arjun stood there, the wind brushed past him gently, rustling the trees, almost as if his father was whispering through them. That evening, he sat on the veranda, watching the sunset, the same way his father once did. The sky was painted in gold and orange, the world slowing down just enough to remind him that love, no matter how late, still counts if it's real. Before leaving, he placed his father's letter inside a small box, along with the diary, sealed it, and wrote on top, "The promise left behind." It wasn't a promise of success or achievement. It was a vow to live differently, to never let love wait again. When he returned home that night, Nisha hugged him quietly, feeling the calm that had returned to him, the peace that had replaced guilt. Arjun whispered almost to himself, "He waited his whole life to hear me say, 'I love you.' I'll spend the rest of mine saying it in every way I can." And somewhere, far beyond words and time, an old man smiled, proud, forgiving, eternal. And days turned into weeks, but the echo of Ramash's quiet wisdom lingered in every corner of Arjun's life, like a soft aftertaste of a memory that refused to fade. It wasn't loud, it wasn't demanding, but it was there, in every small silence that followed the noise, in every decision Arjun made with a slower, more thoughtful heart. He started waking up earlier, no longer rushing through mornings like before. Instead, he would sit by the window, holding a cup of tea, watching the city wake up, just as his father once watched the sun rise from that old veranda. The world hadn't changed. The cars still honked, people still hurried. But Arjun had begun to see things differently. He noticed the elderly man in his building who always sat alone on the bench downstairs. One morning, instead of walking past, Arjun stopped, smiled, and asked, "Would you like some tea?" The old man's eyes lit up with surprise, then gratitude. That simple gesture became a ritual. Every few evenings, they'd sit together, sharing stories, laughter, sometimes silence. The kind of silence that didn't need to be filled because it already spoke volumes. It was in those moments Arjun realized that his father's greatest lesson had never been in the words he spoke, but in the way he lived, with patience, humility, and quiet love. At work, his colleagues noticed a change in him, too. The once short-tempered, always busy Arjun had grown calm, composed, even kinder. He started giving time to people. Real time, not just words thrown in between tasks. When a junior employee made a mistake that could have cost a project, instead of scolding, Arjun sat him down and said, "We all learn when someone gives us the chance to fix things. It was something his father would have said, or perhaps had said once long ago, when Arjun was too young and impatient to understand. One evening, as he packed up to leave the office early, something unheard of before, his colleague teased, "A family dinner? A dinner?" Arjun smiled faintly. "You could say that," he replied, thinking of how he and Nisha had started visiting her parents every weekend, something they'd neglected for years. Each visit filled a little part of him that had gone empty for too long. Nisha noticed it too. The way he laughed more easily now, the way his eyes softened when he spoke of small, everyday things. "You've changed," she said one night as they sat on the balcony, watching the city lights shimmer like stars. Arjun looked out and nodded. "He changed me," he said simply, without saying a word. A few months later, Arjun decided to do something that had been on his mind since the day he read his father's letter. He took a portion of his savings and opened a small community library in his father's hometown, a quiet place where elderly people could gather, read, and share stories. He named it the Golden Hour Library, inspired by the way his father loved watching the sunset. That hour of soft light where everything seemed touched by peace. On the opening day, as he stood there addressing the small crowd, his voice trembled slightly, but carried the strength of love reborn. "This place is dedicated to a man who taught me that the smallest acts of kindness can hold the greatest meaning," he said, his eyes glistening. "And my father never preached lessons, he lived them. And I hope this space becomes a reminder of that we all have time, until we don't. He sends me don't." The audience clapped softly, many wiping tears, and as Arjun looked up, the sunlight filtered through the windows, casting a golden glow on the shelves, just the way his father would have liked it. That night, as he locked the library door, he stood outside for a while, staring at the stars. "Oh, if you see this, Papa," he whispered. "It's not much, but it's a start." A soft wind passed through, carrying the faint scent of jasmine from a nearby garden, the same scent that once filled his father's home. For a moment, Arjun closed his eyes and smiled, feeling the warmth of something invisible but real, like a hand on his shoulder. When he drove back to the city, the road no longer felt long or lonely. Instead, it felt like a bridge, one that connected who he was with who his father had helped him become. He realized then that some people never really leave. They simply teach you how to see the world through their eyes. And so, Ramesh Sharma lived on, in every act of kindness Arjun offered, in every pause he took to listen, in every heart he touched without even realizing. That was the lesson his father had taught him, not through sermons or scolding, but through love that spoke even in silence, through presence that lingered, even after goodbye. And as Arjun whispered one final time before sleep, "A thank you, Papa," he knew somewhere beyond stars and sky that his father was smiling, proud, peaceful, and forever by his side. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when Arjun received an unexpected visitor, a knock on the door that seemed to echo louder than usual through the calm of his apartment. When he opened it, he found a young man standing there, mid-20s, nervous but polite, holding a small brown envelope in his hands. "Sir, are you Mr. Arjun Sharma?" he asked, his voice hesitant yet earnest. "Yes, that's me." The young man smiled awkwardly. "My name's Samir." "I used to know your father. He helped me once, a long time ago. Arjun's eyes softened with surprise. My father? You knew him, Samir nodded quickly. Yes, sir. I grew up near his neighborhood. He helped pay my school fees when my mother couldn't afford them. Said it wasn't charity, just a favor between friends. I never forgot that. His voice cracked slightly as he handed Arjun the envelope. I found this when I visited his house after he passed. It was addressed to you, but I thought maybe you already had it. Still, I wanted to make sure. Arjun's heart began to race as he carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a faded photo of him and his father, taken years ago during a picnic, both laughing with ice cream smeared across their faces, and behind the photo, a small handwritten note. If you ever find this, Arjun, remember, happiness was never meant to be chased, only shared. The word struck something deep inside him, something that felt like both pain and peace at once. He smiled faintly, his eyes misty. He never stopped teaching me, did he? He murmured, more to himself than to Samir. They sat together for hours as Samir shared stories of Ramesh Sharma, how he would sit with neighborhood kids, helping them with homework, how he once gave away his old radio to a boy who loved music, how he always said, the joy of giving never grows old. Listening to those stories, Arjun realized there were parts of his father he had never truly known. A man richer in kindness than wealth. A man who had quietly changed lives while expecting nothing in return. He left behind a legacy. Arjun said softly, and not in things, but in hearts. Samir smiled. Yes, sir, and I'm one of them. When Samir left, Arjun stood by the door for a long time, holding that old photo in his hand, the laughter frozen in time, reminding him that love doesn't fade. It multiplies when shared. Later that evening, Arjun sat with Nisha and told her everything. She listened quietly, her hand resting on his, and said, maybe your father wanted you to find this now, not before, so you'd understand it differently. Arjun nodded, thinking about how life had its own way of delivering messages at the right time. That night, he couldn't sleep. He found himself walking through the balcony, looking up at the same stars that once seemed so far away, but now felt closer, familiar. He thought of all the people his father had helped, the postmen, the neighbors, the children, and wondered how many lives carried a piece of him still. The thought made him smile. The next day, he decided to do something his father would have loved. He organized a small gathering at the Golden Hour Library, inviting everyone from his father's old neighborhood, including Samir. They came, old faces, young ones, people with stories that all began with the same name, Ramesh Sharma. One elderly woman said through tears, he used to bring groceries for me when my legs gave up on walking. Never asked for anything. A middle-aged man added, he fixed my roof during the rains once. Said helping each other keeps the heart young. Arjun listened to every word, his chest tightening with both pride and regret, realizing that the father he thought he knew had been even greater than he imagined. When it was his turn to speak, Arjun stood up and said softly, I spent my whole life trying to be successful, but my father spent his trying to be kind, and now I see, kindness was the greater success. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that holds more emotion than words ever could. When the crowd dispersed, Arjun stayed back, sitting alone in the library's dim light, the photo still in his pocket. He took it out, looked at it once more, and whispered, You're still teaching me, Papa, even when you're gone. The wind outside brushed gently against the windows, carrying a faint chime from the nearby temple bell, soft, distant, but comforting. And for the first time in a long while, Arjun didn't feel alone. He felt accompanied by memories, by lessons, by love that time could never erase. The knock on the door that day hadn't just brought back the past. It had reminded him that his father's story wasn't over. It lived on, quietly, through him. And as he turned off the lights and stepped out into the cool night air, he whispered with a peaceful smile, I'll keep the promise, Papa. Always. A year had quietly passed since Ramesh Sharma's passing. Yet for Arjun, not a single day felt ordinary. Every sunrise reminded him of the man who had loved without measure. And every sunset reminded him of the time he had lost. The seasons had come and gone. Monsoons washing the streets clean, winters painting them in mist, summers blazing with light. But grief had softened into gratitude, and guilt had slowly turned into purpose. Life, as his father would have said, had found its rhythm again. It was mid-April when Nisha reminded him softly, It's almost his birthday. The words hung in the air like a whisper from the past, gentle yet powerful. Arjun froze for a moment, realizing that this time last year he had forgotten, not out of cruelty, but out of distraction, a sin of neglect that had changed everything. But this year, he wouldn't forget. Not again. He decided that his father's birthday wouldn't be a day of mourning. It would be a celebration, not of loss, but of love. He spent weeks preparing, working late nights to make something beautiful, something worthy of the man who taught him the meaning of kindness. On the morning of his father's birthday, Arjun drove back to his hometown with Nisha, carrying a small box, a framed photo, and a heart full of unspoken words. Shoot. The town greeted him with its familiar quiet charm. The same narrow lanes, the same children playing near the temple, the same air, thick, with the scent of jasmine and nostalgia. When they reached the Golden Hour Library, Arjun was surprised to see a small crowd already gathered, the same neighbors, friends, and children who had once known his father. Mrs. Verma was there too, holding a garland of marigolds. "We knew you'd come," she said warmly. "He would have been proud to see what you've built." Arjun smiled, his voice trembling slightly as he replied, "Everything here is his doing, not mine." Inside, the walls of the library glowed softly under the golden light filtering through the windows. Arjun placed his father's photo on a small table in the center, surrounded by candles and flowers. "Happy birthday, Papa," he whispered. Then, taking a deep breath, he opened the box he had brought. Inside were letters, dozens of them, written by people from the town, each describing how Ramesh had touched their lives. One by one, they came forward to read their letters aloud. A shopkeeper who received help during hard times, a student who got his first pair of school shoes, a widow who found comfort in his kindness. Each story painted a piece of Ramesh Sharma's legacy, a mosaic of compassion built quietly over years. As the room filled with emotion, laughter, and tears, Arjun felt something within him lift. The heavy guilt that had haunted him finally dissolving into light. When it was his turn to speak, Arjun stepped forward, holding the same letter his father had written, the one he had found too late. "I never told him happy birthday last year," he began, his voice breaking, "and I thought I'd lost my chance forever. But today I realize, every day I live with kindness, every smile I give, every hand I hold is another birthday for him. Because his love didn't end. It lives through me, through all of us." The room was silent, tears glistening in eyes both young and old. He looked up at the photo, at his father's gentle smile frozen in time, and for a moment he felt him there, not as a memory, but as a presence, warm and real. The candles flickered softly as if moved by a breeze, only he could feel, and in that quiet moment, Arjun whispered, "Happy birthday, Papa." "I didn't forget this time." After everyone left, Arjun stayed behind, sitting by the window as dusk settled over the small town. The horizon glowed in shades of gold and rose, his father's favorite time of day. He took out his diary and wrote a single line. "The best gifts aren't given on birthdays. Nis, they're lived through love." Then, closing the book, he smiled, not with sadness but with peace. As he stood to leave, a small sparrow fluttered in through the open window and perched on the table beside his father's photo. It chirped once softly, almost like a greeting, before flying back into the open sky. Arjun watched it disappear into the evening light, his eyes glistening. "You sent him, didn't you?" he murmured, smiling to himself. That night, as he drove back with Nisha, the road ahead shimmered under the streetlights, long and endless yet strangely comforting. He realized that while he could never turn back time, he could honor it. By remembering, by loving, by living differently. And as the city lights appeared in the distance, he reached over, held Nisha's hand and said, "Next weekend, let's visit the orphanage. I think Papa would like that." She nodded, smiling, tears shining in her eyes. In that simple gesture, a promise to keep giving, Ramesh Sharma's story continued. Avintas. And though the world would move on, birthdays would come and go, and years would pass, one truth remained unshaken. A father's love never dies. It simply finds new ways to live, through the hearts it once touched, through the lessons it once taught, and through the son who finally remembered not his stoat. Just his father's birthday, but the reason it mattered.